This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
A string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
The amount of victims in such a short time was unbelievable.
Real people losing real money, but the criminals are ghosts.
The anger, the frustration, the fear.
From the BBC World Service, this is Evil Corps.
The story of a cybercrime case that stretches from small-town America to the backstreets of Moscow.
Listen now. Search for Cyberhack wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the History Hour from the BBC World Service with me, Max Pearson, the past brought to life by those who were there. Coming up, from 1985, one of the most notorious killings in apartheid South Africa.
When my dad's remains and that of Matthew Goniwe were found, and my mum likes to put it in a way where she says, our world became very dark.
Also, a key witness in the notorious O.J. Simpson murder trial.
When I knew I was going to testify, it was the worst thing in my life that I'd ever been faced with. I mean, I absolutely, positively love the guy.
And the making of a photo of John F. Kennedy in the Oval Office, in which his young son stole the show.
The president's desk flew open and there he was. I never knew. I almost fainted. But you know instinctively that that's a hell of a picture.
But before that, a moment from the past to make you stop and think about that daily cup of tea that many millions of people enjoy. It's 10 years since women tea pickers in southern India staged an extraordinary 9-day sit-in outside their employers' offices in an unprecedented display of anger over low wages and poor living conditions. Jacqueline Payne has the story of how this female workforce fought for justice and improved the lives of thousands of plantation workers.
It's Monday the 7th of September 2015, and since early morning hundreds of women have been flooding into Munnar, a hill town in India's southwestern coastal state of Kerala. Police are on guard outside the headquarters of KDHP, one of the area's largest tea producers, where its female employees are protesting on the picket line. Rajeswari, a fourth-generation Tamil tea picker, has emerged as one of the leaders.
We
are not afraid of the company, the union or the police. No one in this world can scare us. We only fear for our jobs. We have more work and less salary and we can't live. We started our strike for this reason alone. We didn't want to go on strike, but our circumstances left us with no choice.
Every day their numbers swell, with more angry women streaming into Munnar. Please keep watch as they file in, waving flags and carrying placards. On the picket line, the women's fury is captured by AsianNet News.
We're all going on hunger strike. We won't give up until we are paid 500 rupees salary. The cost of living is the same for everyone, including the management and workers. People are suffering.
We are the ones working. They keep the profit to themselves. How is this fair? We will continue our fight if we don't get a salary increase.
48 hours earlier, Rajeswari had been called to a union meeting. The women's productivity meant they'd picked more tea leaves and production was up. They'd hoped their extra efforts would mean a pay increase, but demands for a 20% bonus had already been turned down by their employer. And when the union announced it was siding with the company, there's anger.
The union leader called women from all the tea estates. He says they know the situation facing all the workers, that you want a salary increase and you are struggling. He says don't go for a strike. They will talk to the management and find a solution. But while he was speaking, a group of women from Periyavara estate suddenly climbed onto the stage and grabbed the mic, broke it and threw it away. That was how the strike started. We were left with no other choice.
Their outrage is captured by TV crews at the meeting.
Initially, only 21 women from one plantation participated, but after the TV coverage, many more women from 36 estates joined our cause. The daily pay of 231 rupees was not enough for us. We demanded an increase to 500 rupees.
The equivalent now would be a daily increase from $2.68 to $5.81. And they also tell the union that the 10% bonus must be doubled. By day 4, there's still no movement from either side. The women continue their daily sit-ins, blocking the town from the outside world. As the strike wears on, pressure grows on the tea pickers, who are usually their family's main earner. Rajeshwari's forced to pawn ornaments and borrow money from relatives. But the women find there's huge public support for them.
Everyone helped us to prepare food, like lemon rice. Otherwise, we would have been starving at some point during our Samaram protest. One mother fainted and fell down. There were people from Munnar and outside helping by giving us rice and vegetables. Some people brought us cooked food in big containers, enough for 500 people. On some days, people brought us kanji, rice porridge. So people helped us at every level.
But when it comes to help from their union, the women refuse it, fearing that the union is working with managers to end the strike. And they also kept men away from their campaign. New Delhi TV reported live from the scene.
You can see hundreds of people here. There are men around who have now gathered to see what's happening. But if you ask the women, they will say, we have told our men to stay away from these protests because they are not the ones who do hard labor. They are demanding better wages, better bonuses. So basically a protest of women here who have gathered together in very spontaneous protests. You can see the roads completely blocked to the main town of Munnar.
10 years earlier, in 2005, KDHP became the largest employee-owned tea company in the world, and workers like Rajeshwari were handed shares in the company as it tried to become more worker-friendly. But she says it changed nothing.
We don't even get a single cup of tea from the company. If I want a kilo of tea, I have to pay money and buy it from Munnar town. To get tea, we all have to go to the shop. Then what is the point of our shares in the company?
And there's anger about housing, education and healthcare.
We have a general hospital here. It has only one doctor for everything. I had a skin problem. The doctor gave me treatment for 2 weeks, but my condition did not improve. People with money can get different treatment. I had to go to the town of Adimali and spend 3,500 rupees to see a skin doctor. When I only had 100 rupees, how can I get the treatment I needed?
A year before the strike, a BBC documentary on India's tea industry reported on the poor living and working conditions of plantation workers and their families.
Tea plantation owners in India are obliged by law to provide and maintain adequate houses and sanitary toilets for workers. But this woman shares her small house with 6 other people and hasn't had a working toilet for 36 years. Homes have broken roofs, walls are soaking wet, and this, well...
Oh my God, this place is infested with mosquitoes.
KDHP says the women do get extra benefits by being shareholders, with 500 grams of tea given to workers on request every month, only charging them the previous year's cost of production. And they have access to a 150-bed hospital offering free specialist treatment. At least 6,000 women take part in the daily sit-ins, and the strike brings Munnar to a complete standstill. The tea company doesn't give in, blaming a sharp price drop on international tea markets, which has hit its profits. But the women don't give up either, and finally, as evening begins on day 9 of the strike, an agreement's reached to pay the women's 20% bonus after the government's forced to intervene. Eventually, the company agrees to up their salary to 301 rupees a day. That's the equivalent now of $3.50. By next morning, the women are back in the plantations picking tea. But their protest had a lasting impact.
Only Only after our 2015 protest, hundreds of thousands of women became empowered. Before that, our women didn't go out much. It was only after our protest campaign that our women started participating in sports like football and volleyball and joining women's groups. All these changes happened after our campaign. It's all because of the protest we conducted here in Munnar. Now, we are living like humans. We are not slaves. We are not animals. We all are humans now after this strike.
Rajaswari still works at the same tea plantation alongside the other women who took on a huge company 10 years ago and won. She was talking to Jacqueline Payne. So that was a significant moment in the story of tea in India. But the plant, its growing, picking and being made into tea, has a long history to unpack. Shobita Banerjee is the founder of Thirst, a charity that is working to transform the tea industry. She was born on that same tea plantation in Munnar, South India, and tea is her specialist subject. Welcome. So how and when did tea first arrive in India?
So during Queen Victoria's reign, the British got a real taste for Chinese tea, and eventually in the late 1800s, the British discovered that they could grow tea in their own colonies, in India in particular, using plants that they'd smuggled out of China. So they set up plantations in India and later in Sri Lanka, and the British grew their tea in these Asian colonies. They sold it in England and in their American colonies, and the empire became hugely reliant on this industry and the taxes that they earned from tea. So tea was really the world's first multinational industry.
So the British stole it from the Chinese in order to counter the Chinese monopoly on tea, which was becoming very popular during the 19th century. But what factors contributed to tea becoming such a huge cultural and indeed economic phenomenon in India?
Well, funnily enough, tea was actually grown and drunk by some tribal communities in the northeast of India, unbeknownst to the British. But it was only when the British tea trade got underway that it started to be widely consumed in India. So a little bit like cricket, it became as much a part of Indian culture as British one.
And indeed, there's not just one tea, is there? There are many types of tea, named predominantly after regions of India.
So actually, there is only one type of tea, which is Camellia sinensis. All tea that we know is grown from that camellia plant. The variations of flavour and colour, etc., from those different parts of India, Assam, Darjeeling, Nilgiri, but also different parts of the world like Ceylon, which is Sri Lanka, and Kenya, etc. Those variations are caused by where the tea is grown and how it's processed. And tea, like wine, gets its unique flavour from its terroir, from the soil, the climate, the elevation that it's grown at.
And as you said, tea is very important to the economy of India. But how has the industry evolved in the last century and into this century, given that it may have had its roots in the Raj, where perhaps a population could be, if you like, subjugated to pick tea at very low cost. But we just heard about protests that have emerged in this century. How has it been allowed to become an industry where some feel that they have been exploited?
Well, when India gained independence from Britain in 1947, the tea plantations, the industry as a whole almost, was handed over to Indian companies, and they continued to be run in more or less exactly the same way ever since. So with a small group of managers in charge of a community of several thousand people, including tea pluckers and labourers and their families. And in 1951, the Indian government passed the Plantations Labour Act, which formalised the responsibility of tea companies to provide these communities with work and housing, healthcare, primary education, even food rations. And this continues to be in place today. And the tea is processed in factories on the plantations and then mostly sold via auction, exactly as it was done in colonial times. But the biggest change has been the exponential growth of the smallholder tea sector. So that's, smallholder farmers growing tea on small plots along with other crops instead of these huge plantations. And the other major change has been the loss of India's dominance of the global tea exports. The British now drink as much coffee as tea, if not more, and it's also become less common in other parts of Europe and America. And although it's still hugely popular in the Middle East and Russia, after independence, the USSR became a huge market for Indian tea, which then disappeared when the Soviet bloc was dissolved, and the Indian tea industry has really been reeling ever since.
That's Shobita Banerjee, founder of Thirst, a charity that is working to transform the tea industry. Now, there is a very famous photograph of John F. Kennedy from the 1960s that we're going to hear about next. It's not of the American president delivering historic speeches in Berlin or Washington, and it's not of the tragic circumstances surrounding his assassination. It shows JFK working at his desk in the White House with his cheeky young son underneath. Rachel Naylor uses the transcript of an interview provided by the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum to tell this story.
It's the 2nd of October 1963, and photographer Stanley Tretick has just taken his best picture. It's of President John F. Kennedy in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. But this photo is not like previous presidential portraits. In this photo, while the president sits at the Resolute desk looking through some paperwork, his 2-year-old son John F. Kennedy Jr., known as John John, is peeking out of a secret door at the bottom, dressed in his pyjamas and dressing gown. Something he often liked to do, according to the president's special assistant, Dave Powers.
John would hide behind the desk, and you know the part that opens up? Although it happened every morning, he'd make a scratching, knocking noise, and the president would bend over and say, "Is there a rabbit in there?" And John would come busting out, and the president, no matter how many times it happened, would act surprised, and John would go into hysterics. And some mornings when the president's back was bothering him, I'd have to be the fellow that would act surprised.
On this occasion, Stanley just happened to capture it, according to the transcript of an interview from 1964, spoken by an actor.
That was a complete surprise. John just was in the office running around, and the president's desk flew open, and there he was. I never knew. I almost fainted. But you know instinctively that that's a hell of a picture. You couldn't miss with a picture like that. So he went around the desk a couple of times, and he did that. Then he whispered a few times with his father. Then Randolph Churchill came in for an interview, one of those private little things that Kennedy always had. And he was playing with John a little bit, and then they brought a bottle of scotch in. Kennedy looked over at me, and he got a little nervous when he saw the scotch. I said something about, "Don't let John get near the booze." But the most interesting thing about the story, the thing that stays with me more than anything else, is Kennedy's interest in the child, which was incredible. You know, he was more concerned with what I thought about the child than he was about my pictures. He kept saying, "What do you think of him? Isn't he a charge?" He'd never say, "Well, have you got enough pictures?" or "Is that okay?" or anything like that. But he always asked about the boy, and he really liked him.
Stanley became friends with JFK during his presidential campaign in 1960. When he took office, Stanley took many photos of the president in the White House with his children, Caroline and John Jr.
There were several times when he displayed a thing with him, which I thought it's almost sensual. Like John was sitting on the floor of his office that first night, and he was talking to him. And he was saying something to the president, and the president was looking down and talking to him. And then he just kind of reached for him. He reached for the boy and pulled his pajama up, bathrobe and pajama, and he kind of rubbed his bare skin right above his rear end. He wanted to touch him. And then another time, when he was sitting outside with him, he put him over his knee like he was going to spank him. But you could see the way he was feeling him, and he was having fun with him. He'd always kind of feel at him. And, it was a genuine thing between the two of them. The boy also sensed his father. I think it would have really grown.
Thankfully, the president felt the same about the photo as Stanley.
I put them in various situations, a different pile for each situation. So when he came in to look at them, I told him he could start here and then go around. He said, "Is the one on top, is that the best one?" I said, "No, they're just in situations." So he started going through them. He flipped through them very fast. When he got to the picture where the kid was under the desk, he said, You can't miss with these, can you, Stan?
Stanley knew his photos were going to go down a storm at Look magazine where he worked. And the president's personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, couldn't wait to see the spread.
Mrs. Lincoln called me. I don't know, she must have called me at least a half a dozen times during the period of several days.
I guess, did Laura show you the final layout on it? Or?
No, just a picture. Yeah, the pictures. And I understand that you're perhaps going to put one in of Caroline.
Yeah, well, we're checking it out very thoroughly. You know, we wouldn't dare put it in unless they said okay.
Oh, I know you wouldn't.
Don't you worry. Well,
No.
Look, thanks a lot for all your help.
Well, it's a pleasure, because you've been nice to me.
Well, how else could we be? Okay, well, look, after this weekend, then I'll send a note. In the meantime, I'll be in town at the office.
All righty.
Thank you, Miss Lincoln.
Bye. Bye.
We have a thing. We don't like to show a copy of our magazine until the last possible minute. We get a make-ready 2 weeks before it comes out, and then we get a full copy a week before it comes out. So I waited. He saw the pictures, I guess, about 6 days before they came out. He saw the copy of the magazine. That is, he'd already seen the pictures. So I brought them all over to him, and that was the last time I saw him. I was told later, after I showed him the pictures, he ran all over the White House with them, showing people. There again, it was like a guy with a wallet full of pictures more than anything else. Like a father showing a wallet full of pictures. This is my boy. How do you like him? It wasn't my pictures. He didn't care whose pictures they were. They were just pictures of the boy that he liked so much. He ran all over showing them to people. Then when Jackie, she was back, and he had this set of pictures and he showed them to her upstairs, and she was pleased with them. She wasn't mad about it at all. And then she couldn't wait for the magazine to come out to see them.
And neither could Stanley. He was keen for the magazine to use them as soon as possible.
We were going to use them sometime in January in order to get a full range of color. You can't get color in the magazine unless you have the space for it. And the issue it appeared in, all the color space was gone, so they had to revert to black and white on it. But there was a big hassle, I remember, at the magazine about it. And I had arguments with them about using the pictures as quickly as they could. Now, I don't know why. I'm not going to sit here and say it was fate or whatever it was. I don't know. Finally, they decided they'd use it in an issue 6 weeks later, their normal lead time. But if they rushed it, they could do it in 4 weeks. What I told them was this, that the story is hottest now, and it's very competitive, and somebody is going to come in and get something, and we can get killed by waiting that long. So then they said they'd do it. So this was the incredible timing of it.
The month after the photo was taken, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
The death of John F. Kennedy happened in Dallas at 12:25. 35 minutes later, President Kennedy was dead. He and his wife Jackie and the governor of Texas, John B. Connally, were driving through Dallas in the big presidential limousine, usually bulletproof, this time vulnerable. The transparent hood had been taken down to give the Texans a better view.
He died on the 22nd, Friday, and the pictures were first on the stands.
Stanley's photo ran as part of an exclusive picture story in Look magazine on the 3rd of December 1963, with the headline, The President and His Son.
This only whetted people's appetites to see more of John. They were just delighted in John. According to Pamela Tenure,
the press secretary to the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy,
Jackie told her on that Friday night when they were back here, whether they were in Bethesda Hospital waiting for the body or in the White House or what. She said it was an act of God. The pictures were made when they were.
The words of the photographer Stanley Trettick, as compiled by Rachel Naylor. Stanley died in 1999, just a week after John Kennedy Jr.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Still to come, 30 years on, a key witness in the trial of the American football star O.J. Simpson, who was acquitted of murdering his ex-wife and her friend. Plus the first esports tournament, and as this week sees 40 years since the release of Microsoft Excel, we look at the history and try to prove that spreadsheets aren't boring.
We had a meeting, I remember, throwing out like our own names that we wanted. So had you left it to the developers, you would have either gotten one of two names. We were going to call it Number Buddy or Mr. Spreadsheet.
Before that, one of the most notorious killings from the apartheid era in South Africa. In 1985, 4 men from the farming town of Cradock in the Eastern Cape were abducted at a roadblock. Their bodies were later found mutilated and burned. What you're about to hear includes graphic descriptions of violence. The men became known as the Cradock Four. 40 years on, no one has been held responsible for the deaths. Fort Kalata's son, Lucanio, was just 3 years old when his father was one of those killed. He's been telling Dan Hardoon about his family's ongoing fight for justice and how his earliest memories are of his father's funeral.
I don't think I had been to a funeral at that point in my life. I remember holding on to my mother's dress because I was afraid.
Lucanio's father, Fort Kalata, was born in 1956, as apartheid's grip on South Africa was tightening, a system that forced black people into segregated schools, jobs and neighbourhoods. Fort was a teacher and had 3 young children.
He was a very strict teacher, but also the kind of teacher that spent money from his own pocket to buy bread, milk, that he gave to his pupils. That's the kind of man he was.
Politics ran in the family. Fort's father had been a key figure in the African National Congress, the main movement fighting apartheid through protest and armed resistance. In Cradock, Fort and the other 3 men were involved in grassroots organisations that openly defied the government.
He had been part of a leadership collective that had successfully seized power from the apartheid government. From January all the way to June 1985, the people of Cradock, they governed themselves, having fought on a daily basis with the apartheid security branches. They also started showing other towns that are surrounding Cradock what those towns needed to do to be able to liberate themselves from the apartheid government. And I think because of that, they were then earmarked to be permanently removed from society. And that is indeed what happened.
On the night of the 27th of June 1985, the Cradock Four were driving back from a political meeting when they were stopped at a roadblock.
My father and 3 of his comrades, Matthew Goniwe, Sparo Mkhonto and Sicelo Mhlauli, left Cradock to attend a meeting in the city of Port Elizabeth. The meeting ran a little bit late, so the 4 of them only got to depart heading towards Cradock at around 9 o'clock that evening. Around 90 kilometers outside of Port Elizabeth, there was a roadblock set up by both the South African police and the South African Defence Force. My father, Fort, was driving the car. It was here where the Honda Ballard that they were driving in was stopped. My father and his comrades were then kidnapped.
There were no eyewitnesses to what happened that night. 2 days later, the brutalised bodies of Sparo Mkhonto and Sicelo Mhlauli were discovered near Port Elizabeth. News of their killings reached Lucanio's mother, Lamonde.
Even though 2 of the 4 were found dead, she still had hope that maybe my father had escaped. And she tells us that even on the Saturday, she still prepared a plate of food for my dad, but obviously he never came back. They were only informed on the Tuesday when my dad's remains and that of Matthew Goniwe were found. And my mum likes to put it in a way where she says her world became very dark. It's almost as if someone had switched the lights off.
And a warning, this next bit contains a graphic description of violence.
Their bodies were discovered, burnt beyond recognition. They had multiple stab wounds. My father's ring finger on his left hand had been severed off. The ring that he was wearing was nowhere to be found. His tongue was elongated, and parts of his thigh looked as if it had been bitten by a dog because there was a piece of flesh missing.
The funerals of the Cradock Four drew tens of thousands of mourners from across South Africa. Lucanio was 3 years old at the time.
I remember being really very scared, just by the sheer amount of people. My mum crying a lot, and her telling me when I had said that we needed to go home because maybe my dad was waiting for us at home. And she told me that my father was in the red box. There's a thing that we do here in South Africa. It's called a toy. It's almost like when people get into like a chant and we're singing struggle songs. It's left, right, left, like almost like a march. Now, if you can imagine 20, 30, 40,000 people toying at the same time, and that movement shook the ground underneath my feet. And I can actually still, sometimes, I can still feel it.
The police and apartheid government denied any involvement in the deaths of the Cradock Four. Despite 2 inquests, no one was ever prosecuted. But a leaked security document later revealed a top-secret order calling for their, quote, permanent removal from society. For Lucanio, that meant growing up without a father.
Fathers are meant to give a sense of identity to their sons. So my father wasn't there to teach me about our family history. What the apartheid police did is that even after my dad had died, they continued to raid our home. But I felt powerless because how was a 7, 8-year-old boy, how was I meant to protect my mom and my sisters against these grown men who had killed my father, basically?
I, Nelson Mandela.
On the 10th of May 1994, South Africa entered a new era as Nelson Mandela became the country's first black president following its first democratic elections.
Just over a year after he was in office, he came to Cradock to lay a wreath at the graves of the Cradock Four, and he called them the true heroes of the struggle for liberation.
A year later, Mandela set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate apartheid-era crimes and promote national healing.
We were convinced that the government, as led by the African National Congress, would prosecute the people that were responsible for my father and his comrades ending up being buried in red coffins.
In 1999, 6 former police officers sought amnesty from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for their role in the deaths of the Cradock Four. It was denied on the grounds that they'd failed to fully disclose the circumstances of the killings, but they were never prosecuted and all have since died. For decades, the Cradock Four families have campaigned for justice, and a new inquiry is now underway.
Because we can't prosecute any of the people that were there on the night of 27 June 1985, for us, justice now, I suppose, is having the truth as unadulterated as we can about what happened to my father, so that future generations can never dispute what happened to the Cradock Four.
The extraordinarily measured recollections of Lucanio, whose father, Fort Kalata, was one of the murdered Cradock Four in South Africa 40 years ago. He was speaking to Dan Hardoon. We jump forward a decade now to the United States and the hugely controversial O.J. Simpson case. It was in 1995 that the American football legend and movie star was acquitted of murdering his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman. Ron Shipp, a police officer and a former close friend of O.J. Simpson's, decided to testify against him in the criminal trial. In 2017, he spoke to Rebecca Kesby, and a warning: this contains descriptions of the injuries suffered by the victims.
When I knew I was going to testify, it was the worst thing in my life that I'd ever been faced with. I mean, I absolutely, positively love the guy.
Ron Shipp was from a family of police officers. He first met O.J. Simpson as a schoolboy in 1968, when O.J. was already a star on the football field. And by the 1980s, Ron and his wife were regular visitors to the Simpson household that O.J. then shared with his second wife, an attractive model, Nicole Brown.
As a couple, they were hilarious. And O.J. was the type of person, he made you feel good.
You got on really well with Nicole, didn't you? What sort of woman was she?
She was fantastic. She was a very funny woman. I mean, I used to watch them together, and they were always joking and, goofing off. Like I said, as far as I was concerned, they were the ideal couple.
But by 1989, their relationship was in trouble. On New Year's Day, police responded to reports of domestic violence at the Simpson household. Reports showed that Nicole told the police she feared for her life. She'd been beaten so badly she was hospitalized. She also said she'd called the police 8 times before. O.J. Simpson pleaded no contest to a charge of spousal abuse and was sentenced to 120 hours community service. But Ron was concerned, particularly because he taught a class on domestic abuse to police officers.
He was the first one to tell me that they had some kind of a fight, scuffle, whatever you want to call it. It was later on when I ended up talking to her, when she was telling me about how he had been beating her, hitting her for years. She showed me the pictures of past beating. I couldn't believe it. And I explained to her the things about domestic violence, jealousy, aggressive, anger, just the different profiles. And she just kept telling me, well, OJ's every one of those. I went, whoa, really?
Ron says Nicole asked him to speak to her husband, OJ, about domestic violence.
And I did the very next day. And he denied all of them. He said the only thing that he felt, he said, I might be a little bit jealous. He said, but that's it.
The couple divorced in 1992 and were living separately when, early in the morning on June 13th, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson was found brutally murdered on the steps of her home. The body of a restaurant waiter, Ron Goldman, was found close by. Ron Shipp remembers hearing the news.
I guess I didn't really want to believe it. I got sick to my stomach.
While the investigation was underway, did you see O.J.?
Oh, I did see O.J. the day after the murders. I called the house, and I said, should I come over? He goes, yeah, man, come on over here. When I was driving over there, the first thing that went through my mind was, I hope he doesn't have any cuts.
Why?
Because from being a cop on numerous assault calls, especially stabbings, it's like 8 out of 10 guys seem like they always seem to cut themselves. Blood squirting everywhere. It's all in their hands, and the knife slips out of their hands. And when I got to OJ's house, and I walked through the door, he was sitting on the couch, and the first thing I saw, his left finger was bandaged. I just couldn't help it. I said, OJ, what happened to your finger? He just said, I cut it on a glass in Chicago. But what happened then was even worse, because then somebody else came over, asked OJ, what happened to your finger? OJ said, I was chipping golf balls out on the front lawn. And then maybe a couple hours later, somebody else asked the same question. And he said, I was trying to get the cell phone out of the car. I looked at him again and went, man, you just told 3 different stories, from 3 different questions. You have a fresh cut on your finger after your ex-wife's been stabbed and murdered. They asked him to take a lie detector test. I said, well, did you say yes? And then he told me at the time, no, I didn't. And I said, why would you say no, OJ? And he said, well, he kind of laughed and said, to be honest, Shipp, I've had dreams of killing her. And a lot of times when people get ready to take a lie detector test and they're guilty, I'm not saying all the times, but they will tell you an excuse as to why they don't pass it. So when he said that he had dreams of killing her, I wanted to get the heck out of there. And as I left, I called my wife, told her that I believed OJ had killed Nicole, and I cried all the way home.
Although Ron suspected that O.J. Simpson may be responsible for the double murder, when the case came to trial, he didn't really want to testify against his friend.
I was just so torn. I got to be honest. I didn't know what was up and what was down anymore. I really didn't. It was almost like having the worst dream you could ever think of.
Ron was persuaded to testify when he found himself alone in the office of the district attorney. In front of him was a book of photographs and detailed shots of the murder scene.
I opened the first page and there was a bunch of nice pictures of Nicole in there. Turned another page and bam, there was the homicide scene pictures. And I just almost just passed out. You know, just I can't even describe the feeling, you know, because it's one thing to see, you know, I've been on a lot of homicides throughout my career at LAPD. You know, of course you feel bad for the families, but you don't know them. But for me to look at these pictures of Nicole, who, you know, I knew very well, you know, I've hugged her and, you know, laughed with her, and to look and see that here's her head almost severed. Even today, I can't even describe what that was like. Poor Ron, you know, he had all these stab wounds in his hands, you know, trying to fight him off. Absolutely horrific. I said, I'll do it. I said, I will testify.
O.J. Simpson always denied the murders. He assembled an experienced and expensive group of lawyers to defend him against the charges. They became known as the Dream Team, and one of their key arguments was that the Los Angeles Police Department was institutionally racist, and they claimed that incriminating evidence was planted to frame O.J. Simpson.
But this statement about whether somebody sounds black or white is racist, and I resent it, and that's why I stood and objected.
Everyone in this case is that no one planted any evidence at any time.
You are both a cop and an African-American man, and so you're in this situation, in this courtroom. What was it like to walk into that?
It was really weird because once I walked through that door, my legs started shaking. People were dropping like flies as far as my friends. I felt like I couldn't really trust anybody. But I knew one thing I knew I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to lie.
You do realize, Mr. Shipp, that by testifying as you have, you are going to enhance the name of Ron Shipp.
But that's not why I'm doing this, Mr. Douglas. I'm doing this for my conscience and my peace of mind. I will not have the blood of Nicole on Ron Shipp. I can sleep at night, unlike a lot of others.
On October the 3rd, 1995, after just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
Ron Shipp watched the verdict in the prosecutor's office.
When they said not guilty, I just couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And then I just started thinking about, okay, what is our life going to be like now? Because I was the only person that testified against him. I was called, you know, you sell out. You know, I was called so many names. It broke my heart.
Ron Shipp was speaking to Rebecca Kesby in 2017. The O.J. Simpson case was one of the most dramatic in American history. No one else has ever been accused of the murders. O.J. Simpson was later found liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman in a civil trial brought by their families and ordered to pay them $33.5 million in damages. Simpson died last year. Right, let's take a break from murder and mayhem as we turn to this week's sporting witness. In October 1972, the first ever e-sports tournament took place. Bruce Baumgart was a 26-year-old student at the time, and he won the final event. Bruce has told his story to Guy Kilty.
I was just really excited to have actually won because the best player in the lab had gone to a folk dance that night, and the second and third best I had wiped out. So it was really an equal layer of competition, and I got my picture in the Rolling Stone at 26, and it's followed me the rest of my life.
Just in case you don't know, esports is where people watch other people play video games. It's now a multi-billion-dollar industry with thousands of people turning up to watch tournaments all around the world. But competitive video gaming was in its infancy in the early 1970s. At Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Lab, Bruce was conducting research during the day, but by night he was playing a video game, Space War, and building a reputation as one of the best players in the country. Space War is one of the first computer games ever developed. It was written by a team of programmers in the early 60s at Massachusetts Institute of Technology on the PDP-1 computer, an early mini-computer that used a screen and keyboard. And it was a tournament using that video game held in October 1972 that's now recognised as the first ever esports event. Bruce won the final showdown of the night against 4 other players. Space War was groundbreaking for its time. But how does it work, Bruce?
Okay, you're looking at a two-dimensional map. You're looking down on the solar system. The sun is in the middle. And you have, the background is a field of stars. You have 2 ships, and gravity sucks the ships into the star unless you get up to orbital speed. There's only 4 buttons. Accelerate the rocket, turn left, turn right, fire a torpedo. The object of the game is to shoot as many ships as you can and survive.
Okay, have you got all that? The best thing about Space War was that players could play against each other at the same time, the whole thing could be shown on a big screen, and watched by an audience.
It's human against human. It's not really a computer game, so it makes it much more intelligent and lively than other games that were like puzzles.
Bruce and his friends had been playing Space War for a few years already by the time 1972 came around. They were just happy playing against each other at night when the computers weren't in use for research. It was only when a journalist at Rolling Stone turned up that the first esports tournament started to take shape.
Stuart Brand was just part of the 1960s scene. He was an enthusiast for psychedelic drugs, but also for technology and do-it-yourself technology. He then convinced the editors of the Rolling Stone that he wanted to investigate the opportunity to bring computer technology to the people.
As part of his investigation, Stuart Brand visited several US universities and their technology labs. But it was the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab and the game the people there were playing he found most interesting.
He visited, and so he ran into it, and another exciting person in charge of the lab, Lester Ernest, said, "Sure, come, you can look at the lab, and we'll throw a party."
And that's what ended up being the first recognised esports tournament, given the grand title of the Intergalactic Space War Olympics. When Stuart Brand turned up to cover the event in October 1972, he didn't come alone.
The photographer that day was Annie Leibovitz. She was a nobody then, but she was working for the Rolling Stone, and it was quite amazing. Click, 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 going through film.
She would go on to become one of the most celebrated portrait photographers in America. But back then, Bruce showed her something that blew her mind.
I took her picture that night as well using a digital camera, and Annie just did not believe that you could have pictures without film.
The Intergalactic Space War Olympics didn't take place in a stuffy basement on the university campus, or one of the indoor arenas that esports events are held in today.
We were out in the countryside for the actual Space War, and it was just ordinary office, acoustic tiles on the ceiling. We only had 6 of the wonderful display units. You sat at this thing. It was as large as a desk. The screen was 18 inches by 18 inches square, and it had one color, green. The building was divided up into little cubby holes and occasional room of blackboards and tables for seminars or recreation. It's astonishing to think that we did not have personal computers. We did not have telephones. The rooms were named after Tolkien. So the computer room was Mordor, the break room was the Prancing Pony, and so on. And the rooms were labeled in Elvish. So it was definitely a counterculture site.
Playing at 8 p.m. was a novelty, and there was another big change from their usual gaming sessions. At the Intergalactic Space War Olympics, for the first time, 5 players could play against each other rather than the usual 2. Compared to the tens of thousands of people who can show up at an arena for an esports tournament today, the crowd back then was fairly modest. The 30 or so people there were packed into a single room, but at least they'd brought snacks.
The beer and pretzels wasn't the point. It was the playing the games. And so I probably didn't even have a beer or a pretzel. But the gallery, of course, I think went through the beer. I was intending to get back to work after the games and do some more programming. So I was probably on caffeine, coffee. Drinking beer and playing games doesn't go together.
In the final set of games, known as the free-for-all, Bruce and 4 other players played several rounds before he came out on top.
The spaceships, of course, are in the same pattern, the start pattern each time, and you hold a particular control box. I was on the lower left, and my greatest challenger was the top ship. The free-for-all is essentially 2 duels. So you sort of know who the strongest player against you is. And so you try to stay alive, you avoid the dummies and the mines, and you're aiming for your challenger. And it goes quite rapidly for the free-for-all because you either have an accident, you fall into the sun or hit a mine, or the 3 lesser players don't annihilate each other, they're shooting at you. But if you survive the opening, then it's a duel.
His biggest rival on the night was Ralph Gorin, a legend in the space war community.
He was as good, and he wrote the game. He was the programmer who wrote the damn thing.
Bruce and Ralph were the 2 best players on the night, and the contest was tight. But Bruce thinks he had one big advantage that gave him the edge.
I'd been practicing with controller in each hand, controller backwards. So it was the do not even have to think about the buttons. It was total brain reflex. And I would play 2 ships against whoever shows up using either my left or the right hand. So I guess I had the hand-eye coordination written into the brain. You practice until you don't even have to think about your fingers.
After Bruce clinched victory, the partying continued.
Stuart Brand and Annie Leibovitz went around interviewing everybody and taking other pictures, and we talked about how computers were going to take over in the future, and they just didn't believe it.
Looking back, Bruce finds it hard to believe people are still talking about his win more than 50 years later.
Yeah, well, that's a curiosity, but it's a turning point of computer history, where everything was together in a very small room before it blew up and metastasized across the whole civilization.
And despite his status as the first ever esports tournament winner, he doesn't rank it among his biggest achievements.
Winning a one-off game when the game has just been invented is not such a big deal, except for the damn Rolling Stone and the famous photographer.
Nowadays, you can win hundreds of thousands of dollars for winning a big esports tournament, but things were a bit different for Bruce.
I won my picture in the Rolling Stone and a lifetime subscription.
Bruce Baumgart was speaking to Guy Keelty. Esports depend, of course, on computers, and it's 40 years this week since the release of Microsoft Excel, the computer spreadsheet software that's now used all over the world to make life and work easier. Here's Jill Kersley.
Now, Microsoft Excel is a fairly boring spreadsheet program.
It has a reputation for being a bit boring, like a giant, difficult-to-use calculator. But I'm hoping to change that perception, because this story of a spreadsheet includes space tourists,
main ready, lift off,
knitting, and crazy competitions.
How much of you would consider yourself a spreadsheet ninja?
Where Excel isn't just data crunching software, it's a religion.
Would you accept $75 million if it means you can't use Excel for 3 days?
Absolutely not. I live, breathe, and eat Excel.
That's from Australian news and current affairs programme The Project on Network 10. Excel is an electronic spreadsheet document in which information is in cells arranged in rows and columns. It can be used to do financial calculations and plans. It is now estimated to be used by 1.1 billion people worldwide, according to Microsoft statistics. And that means 1 in every 8 people on the planet have used it. They probably worked that out on a spreadsheet.
I would take a Macintosh home at night just to play with Excel, which is kind of, seems weird.
That's self-confessed computer geek Mike Koss, a software developer who worked on the programme. Mike's interest in all things mathematical started as a child. He graduated with a degree in computer science in 1983 and got a job working at a small company in Seattle called Microsoft. Mike was to start working on what was to become Excel, but it wasn't the first spreadsheet program. That was VisiCalc, short for Visible Calculator, and was invented by Bob Frankston and Dan Bricklin. After VisiCalc, the next big spreadsheet software was Lotus 123. Mike and his team set about making a rival. It was a covert operation.
Other employees were not allowed to know what we were working on, so we had to cover our windows, lock our doors. My wife signed an NDA, so she was able to go in. We worked a lot of hours, but she could come in and she would do some knitting and crochet in my office while I was working on stuff late at night. We were very focused on that kind of usability aspect. But the spreadsheet proper was like very traditional to the way that people were using other spreadsheets.
On the development team were people who would now be considered the A-listers of the tech world.
You know, our whole company was a company of geeks. I would say almost everybody was under 25 at the time. We had a few people I would call adult supervision. So we had a few managers who kind of reined in all these young people who were super excited to be working on what we were building. Charles Simone was the head of that group, went on to become a space tourist, traveling to space twice. Gabe Newell was one of our first testers. Gabe went on to start one of the biggest video game distributors in the world now. He was just a young kid out of college. He was tasked with testing all of our code. We'd build code for him every day and hand it off, and then he would put it through its paces and try to break it. I just remember him sleeping in his office. He was really a hard worker.
And then there was the top man, entrepreneur Bill Gates.
Bill had ideas about how to make the spreadsheet more efficient. We were really focused on having a very fast recalculation engine. We would update the spreadsheet whenever you made changes very quickly. The Macintosh only had 128 kilobytes of memory, like an eighth of a megabyte of memory at all. And so we had to fit all of the features you'd see into that space. And like if you took out the first version, it would look kind of primitive, but you'd recognize it. It would be like you'd see all the main functions that you'd have in today's Excel.
What is this? It's Microsoft Excel. Now hold still, I'm about to perform a miracle.
You're crazy, there's no time.
This 1990s TV advert shows two office workers in business suits getting into a lift, worried about getting into trouble with their boss, and producing a spreadsheet in the time it takes for the lift to reach their floor.
Picks up on trends, totals, quarters, dates, and does the projections for me.
My spreadsheet doesn't do that.
Very cool.
And that product needed a very cool name to match.
The programmers were not the most enthusiastic about the name Excel. I think we liked it. In hindsight, I think it's just a great name. And the marketing team, presented, I think, several options to us. We had a meeting, I remember, throwing out like our own names that we wanted. So had you left it to the developers, you would have either gotten one of two names. We were going to call it Number Buddy or Mr. Spreadsheet. We were marketing geniuses at the time, obviously. We went with Excel, thankfully. We were very aggressively going up against Lotus and competing for that market. I remember walking into a discount software store, and I found in a bargain basement bin a copy of Lotus 123 new in the box, and it was selling for $5. And at the time, our product, bundled with other applications, was selling for like $395. So I say, well, yeah, we have actually pretty much crushed our competitors in that case.
And by 2021, there were more competitors of a different type.
It's the most exhilarating sport that you've never heard of, dubbed the Super Bowl for nerds. The Excel World Championships kicked off this week in Las Vegas with...
And 3-time world champion Andrew Nye posted this winning moment on his YouTube channel.
This is a timed elimination. He's running a substitute function here, some formula to get some points on the board.
Andrew Nye, he's looking around, he's taking his headphones off. What is he doing? Okay, is he safe? Is he safe? This is bold. Look at him, crossing his arms. No, the guy is flexing. He's flexing.
Do you think you'll stand a good chance at winning this?
No way. Yeah. I would say, but we did all kinds of fun things. I think we all love the product a lot, I think, and we like to play with it and see what we could do with it.
Mike has been described as the unofficial historian of the original developers, as he's collected lots of memorabilia.
I have things like posters. I have some of my notes and internal schedules, from when we were building it, and lists of bugs. Yeah.
Do all your friends and family ask you for help with spreadsheets then?
I do get that a little bit. Yeah. I still love using spreadsheets. They're pretty fun.
Mike Koss on the history of Microsoft Excel. He was speaking to Jill Kersley. They used to be called geeks. Now they're known as tech bros and are among the richest people in the world. That's it for this edition of the History Hour. If you've got a spreadsheet of things to do next week, I hope you will include joining us for another collection of first-hand stories from the past. For now, though, this is Max Pearson. From all of us here, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
We did something that no one else had ever done.
There was such a excitement and energy about this moment.
It opened the door for everything that rapidly followed.
Witness history.
History as told
by the people who were there.
I was walking in space, the first man ever to do so. I felt almost insignificant, like a tiny ant compared to the immensity of the universe.
Witness history from the BBC World Service.
Listen now. Search for Witness History wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.